Mr. KO.
Hey, Brian, it's good to see you.
Weren't we just here yesterday?
You know, those calendar pages are just falling off the wall like, leaves, autumn leaves.
I measure my progress by how much I can get done and how much versus how much I want to get done between each of the episodes, and I clearly have a lot of work to do.
I know
Well,
we
John,
need
you're
new
looking good.
metrics in this post-pandemic era because our subjective sense of time is all out of whack.
Ah, isn't that the truth? Well, John, you're looking good. It's a pleasure. Although I can just only see your neck and head, the rest of your body is camoed.
That's right. I'm investigating the concept of gray zone warfare, so I decided to put on my camo T-shirt today in
Oh, that's
homage.
amazing.
Yeah.
I'm venturing into that much differently. It's usually all over here in terms of gray zone.
Oh, the gray zone. It's what happens when you think about the gray zone. You get gray hairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, well, it's always awesome to spend time with you, and I want to welcome all of our guests who are tuning in from all over the world. We thank you every week for joining in. So as you're tuning in, as you're hearing things that are interesting, please share where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear where you are. Also, if you have comments, observations, or even questions, we will feature them in real time. So do participate. This is an action-based, user-driven show, and so with that, I'll go ahead and kick things off officially. Welcome to Intersections, a weekly conversational jam session that dives deep into the intersections among technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. We bring diverse personalities. Diverse is probably one way to describe it. Maybe amazing, extraordinary personalities and worldviews together in service of greater understanding and, most importantly, unlearning. My co-host and co-founder here, someone I can't actually see and talk to enough, is John Ko. The Economist has called him Mr. Creativity and a serial innovator. He's a thought leader, entrepreneur, advisor. He's also a friend. He's played a prominent role in the fields of innovation and business creativity for over 30 years. John and I met during Dreamforce 2019 at an amazing dinner that is organized by a friend of ours, Corey Snow. I think it's the introversion dinner, if I'm not mistaken.
How did we ever get invited to that? I wonder.
It was just John made such an impression. We stayed in touch and we planned this show for many months before we went live. Gosh, now I don't even how many months we've been doing this, John.
Well, August 2020. So let's do the math. You know, that's 5 plus 4, 9 months.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. We're
amazing,
doing,
right?
Can't even believe it. Talk about time. Well, among other things, John is the author of the best-selling book "Jamming: The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity." He's a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He's an incredible genius of a musician as well, and I can't wait for you to see us live in his studio in San Francisco, where he has not one, not two, but 3 concert pianos. The living room of his beautiful loft in San Francisco. And he has taught at Harvard Business School. He served as visiting faculty at MIT Media Lab in Stanford. I've seen one of the textbooks he's authored. I've met one of his students, and I've heard other amazing things from students. And he has just literally been teaching the world how to be innovative and how to reimagine the future. John Ko, welcome to Intersections.
Hey, Brian. Thank you very much. Well, I have to hasten to say I only have 2 arms, but I have 3 pianos. So it's always a big decision in the morning as to which piano to play. But let me reciprocate, because Brian is my innovation twin. And in good twin relationships, you have complementarity, you have creative tension, which leads to new ideas. You have a network where 1 + 1 equals infinity. And I feel like I found that with Brian, because he is also someone who has made a career out of taking his thought leadership and projecting it through books, through keynote speeches, through mastery of social media. And really, he was digital before digital was a thing. So now we have digital in relation to social media and innovation and marketing and political processes and so forth and so on. But he was in at the beginning and has grown, and our understanding through him has grown as the field has grown as well. And then to cap it all off, he has a day job, which is global innovation evangelist for Salesforce. So there you go.
There you go. Thank you, John. Thank you. And I am so excited that, I mean, John and I could talk to you all day. We could ask each other questions and engage him. And
it's our plan B in the event that, someone, which hasn't happened yet, but there's always the plan B if someone doesn't show up, that Brian and I will flip a coin and decide who's the interviewer and who's the interviewee for that day.
Indeed. And we have other show formats that we'll be rolling out that'll also involve you as well. So with that said, our first guest is here. He's backstage. He's actually someone I've known. Some of these over 10 years. It's got to be. Jay has been involved in a lot of the industry events. Speaking at a lot of the events together all around the world. He is a two-time, well, actually multi-time author now, if I'm not mistaken. His first, well, not his first book, but the book that I remember I went out and bought and broke through for me was a book called Disrupt You. And it was actually a very powerful title. And also it was a very powerful concept. So Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Thanks, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
You have a new book out, Future Proofing You, and I had prepared some questions, and then, you kind of reminded us of the premise and the inspiration of this book right before we went live, and I thought maybe that's where we'll start. Is share with us the basis of this book and your inspiration for it, and we'll dive in from there.
So, as you so kindly said, Disrupt You was an amazing book that took on a life of its own. And it's in a dozen languages. And I heard from people in 140 countries how it's changed their life. And I don't do the work. They read it and they do the work. But occasionally I get an email, usually from someone young, a millennial, and that would say, this is motivational, but I could never do this. And that kind of ate at me. So I came up with this audacious, insane idea. There's so many self-help guru type books. What if I took an immigrant who grew up on welfare, mentored him one day a week for a year, gave him no capital, didn't introduce him to anybody. He had to start a virtual business that takes no money. And spoiler alert, if you're reading Future Proofing You, he becomes a self-made millionaire in 11 months. And I took those mentor sessions and distilled them down to what I call 12 truths. If you follow these 12 truths, you will be successful. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. The young man's name was Ben Clancy. He was willing to work harder than most people would work in order to live a way that most people can't. So it's in a post-pandemic world when the middle class got decimated, when so many people realized that their career and their path could and will be disrupted again and again. It gives people a way to take charge of their destiny.
Yeah, I can feel you on the self-help category. And I published a book. My last book was Life Scale, and it was a book that documented the journey, turning it into steps of how to sort of untangle yourself from technology's hold on our lives and our thinking and our aspirations, and how to use technology to our advantage to get to whatever our aspirations or ideas of happiness and success look like. And when you dive into something as powerful as this really isn't as much about self-help as it is about literally mentoring someone through each and every word that you've put in this book. And the fact that you've done that with another human being, Jay, is awe-inspiring. And I want to say thank you on behalf of humanity for doing that. I wish more people took this on. So I want to ask you the first question, which is, what is different about this world today, and how individuals can master their own sort of destiny, right? We all have the same friends who preach a lot of the same things, but they're hard to action them. And so what I appreciate about you is that you give us prescriptive advice and we can cut through the clutter. So what's different now about this pandemic world and how we have to think differently about taking control?
So let's go on the positives because we've all experienced the negatives. With remote working, something that's been evolving over the past 40 years, we've now proven that you don't have to live in a major city. You don't have to live in a first world country. We're all interconnected. We are one click away from 7 billion customers. So you only have to be right for a nanosecond to make $1 million or change the world. And that explains how you have self-made billionaires pre-pandemic every 48 hours, now every 26 hours. So I don't know what you did over the weekend, but you guys are slackers.
Clearly.
So now you no longer have to just hire the best people in your town or within 5 kilometers or whatever. You can hire the best people in the world. Number two, we have all the tools to do this. And third, the pace of change in this era of endless innovation is so fast that there's always a new void to fill. So I noticed a pattern. If you would have told me at the start of my career that dozens of friends would become self-made billionaires, I'd say, what are you smoking? But I knew these people before they were household words. And some are very bright, but some aren't. And what I wanted to dispel for people is a 4-year degree doesn't make you wealthy. A higher IQ doesn't make you wealthy. There's only 2 things you need to be successful: insight and perseverance. Everything else can be hired. So if I can teach people how to find the insights to launch a great business, and if I can then take those same people and show them how to nurture and cultivate passion out of their perseverance, that will carry them through. And you're looking at the trailer for my first book.
Well, I think the thing that I love about this trailer is that it's just so visually compelling. But I also wanted to use it as a prop to serve underneath your conversation or your words of wisdom. One of the things that I also would love to hear more about is, we make a lot of excuses as human beings. Like, I can see why someone else can do that. For example, many of our friends who have been very successful in life have a very unique type of personality. You mentioned the person that you did mentor was willing to work harder than everybody else, but does that preclude everyone from being successful in this regard? Or how would you best categorize who could follow your work, Jay? How do we take the first step?
So it's everybody. So the very first step of the 12 truths, which I know both of you subscribe to, is you have to have a growth mindset. It all starts. Everybody thinks of changing the world. No one thinks of changing themselves. And once you realize that every problem in your life every obstacle is an opportunity in disguise, because entrepreneurs don't sell things, they solve things. Solve for 5 people, you have friends. Solve for 1 million, you become wealthy. Solve for 1 billion and you change history. I mean, I've sat in an empty room and created $1 billion company. I've also run companies with, 300,000-400,000 employees. So I've seen it from all sides. And I understand the advantage that the entrepreneur has and the role that an intrapreneur can have in a big organization. But you talked earlier something that I want to touch on, because I know we've shared the same stage and we've seen the same people. I only made myself public to get my message out to help people and pay it forward. I don't coach, I don't monetize. I'm not trying to make a dime off of anybody. But there are these self-proclaimed gurus that try to tell you that fear isn't real. Fear's in your head, you'll overcome fear. They have crazy acronyms for fear. Nothing could be further from the truth. And this stops most people in their track. They're like, I can't get past the fear. You have a fear of failure. You have a fear of being embarrassed, of losing your money, of losing your job, of losing other people's money. And people are immobilized. Well, here's the truth. And this is one of the 12 truths. You have to learn how to harness fear. You can't get past fear. We are biologically hardwired at the central stem of our brain, the oldest part of our brain, the lizard brain, with the fight or flight. You walk into the room, Brian, the first thing I want to know, is this guy going to attack me, eat me? That you can't get past that fear. But if you're walking down San Francisco and you hear a cable car's brakes don't work, it's screeching towards you, it jumps on the sidewalk, what are you thinking about in that exact moment? Are you thinking about losing money, looking embarrassed? No, You're thinking about an existential threat. You will lose your life if you don't do something. So you can prioritize fear. So if you're at a job that isn't satisfying, that doesn't let you live at the level that you deserve, you trade a day of your life, a week of your life, a month, a year. One day you're going to wake up and you've given up the most precious thing, your life, for what? If you believe the purpose of life is to live a life of purpose, keep that at the forefront and all those other fears subside. Now comes the fun part, the harnessing. If you can buy into that simple premise, flip the table. Everybody you go to sell, recruit, raise money from, do business with, has those same fears and may not be so actualized. So I remember in my 20s, I had one of those meetings that we all have at one point in our career. This meeting will change my destiny if it goes well. I was meeting with the CEO of Pepsi. I had something that I thought I researched everything about Pepsi. I was so prepared. This was the meeting. For the CEO, this was the only thing stopping him from going to lunch. It wasn't exactly, the same level of priority. But when I instantly thanked him for taking the meeting and doing it on this day, because tomorrow I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Wait, that's where Coke is. If he does this with them and not us, the board finds out I'm no longer CEO. Changed the whole dynamic. And I did this, it was funny, 2 elections ago, as impossible as this for us to remember, not a single presidential campaign used social media. And I had written a white paper that social media would predict the presidency, and I was early, but I was running an ad tech company that I was CEO of, a small startup, and I wanted some of that $2 billion spent. So I did the same thing. I met with all the campaign managers and told them I was meeting with each of them, and they each realized if they didn't use this tool and somebody else won using it, they'd never get hired again. So I ended up getting Obama and his 3 Republican competitors as clients, and sold the company. The company sold to News Corp for $200 million shortly thereafter. That's how you harness it. And so each of these 12 truths aren't rocket science. It's just for some reason our educational system is teaching you to be a factory worker. Enough reading and writing to help somebody else live their dream. Why?
I mean, as I'm listening to you speak and I'm thinking about some of the challenges I've had in my own experiences, it's human, right? I mean, we're just, if you don't have that drive, we need help understanding that you still have the ability and to do these things. For example, in addition to growth mindset, fear is good. You've talked about how failure is great. You've talked about how you have to fill a void. You talk about things that are all practical, like becoming a tech startup, but sometimes it's just not natural for us to, well, one, to realize that we have the capacity, but 2, to connect the dots. And your 12 truths, I feel like, have done a very good job of connecting the dots in each and every one of us. John, before I turn it over to you, I just do want you to expand on the connection between failure and filling the void, though, please, because that I can tell you my own personal story, but I just love to hear, how you as a leader can explain that.
So a toddler doesn't stand up one day and go, "Mom, I shall walk across the room," right? They take a step, they stumble, they get up, they figure out what doesn't work, they do it again and again. When you sit down to play a video game, you don't sit down and 4 hours later go, "Yeah, I nailed this video game." You hit that immovable obstacle, you hammer, you figure out how to get past it, and guess what? There's another one. Well, that's your life and that's your career. So what you're going to understand is the only way to have success is by failing, is by trying things that weren't tried, getting farther into the weeds than somebody else, and that's where the gold is. And that explains how Jeff Bezos could lose money year after year after year after year and come out the backside of it as the wealthiest man in history. So you learn, and when you fail, you don't end up where you started. You either earn or you learn, but either way, you're more valuable. And so people have to be willing to embrace that. When I've had direct reports, whether a large company or in a startup, I've had the same line to people for 3 decades that report to me. First one is, you don't work for me, I work for you. You tell me what you need to do your job. If I don't get it for you, then that's my fault. Number 2, if you work for me for a year and you do not make a mistake, I will fire you. And that is the culture that I put out there. And that's why, this innovation comes. It isn't that you have to be Doc Brown sitting on the toilet inventing the flux capacitor. That's not what innovation is. Innovation is there are a ton of solutions that are over here that have never gone to that niche that you want to do. And it's how to differentiate. Because I'll tell you this, people look at me and say I'm successful. Yeah, but I don't feel that way. Because on any given day, I know there's somebody smarter, better connected, better educated, wealthier, better looking. I hate that person. But the point is, I hate competition. So the second you apply for a job, it should dawn on you that someone else has had that job and a bunch of other people have had that job and somebody's done it longer. You're coming from a no-win situation. But if you figure out something new, if you're the only person doing it, by definition, you're the best in the world. And that's what I did with this young man. He grew up like everybody with social media. He wanted to do social media marketing. But if you're basically, a kid on welfare, you're not going to get that call from Ford Motor. Hey, will you do our social media for us? And there's 50 million people doing it. So I said, look at what's happening. Look at the zeitgeist. What's a new topic? What's something everybody's talking about? And make yourself the best social media person for that one area. And the second he did that, people that were paying him $200 a month, we're now paying him $30,000 a month for the same services, and happy and doing more. And using MBA speak, the second he killed it for one client, he now had a case study. And it's as simple as those steps.
Wow. Hey, John, I don't want to take over the whole conversation, so please.
Well, not at all. So I just had a couple. I think we have time for a couple. One is harkens back to 1983 when I was a member of the Entrepreneurship Interest Group at Harvard Business School. So I've been involved with the field of innovation for a while, I guess. And I'm curious to know what you think remains the same in terms of the entrepreneur and their necessary proficiencies, and what has changed given the fact that the operating environment today is radically different from whatever 38 years ago.
So you and I are the same generation, about the same age. It is 1,000 times easier now. You have no gatekeepers to capital. You have crowdfunding. You have a borderless way to raise money. You have the infrastructure already built that connects us. We all walk around with a device more powerful than NORAD in war games. I mean, so that part is what's easier. What I would say is an oversight in Disrupt You, and that I really wanted to dig in on this one, that the pace of change is so much faster that it's virtually impossible in my mind for the self-made man or woman, to do it on your own. You do need a series of mentors. One of my 12 truths is don't fly solo. And I teach people how to use LinkedIn and other tools to find those mentors that want to help you in your journey to abundance. And, I used to run the world's largest music company and was part of that myth creating machine. When you see that artist on the stage and 100,000 fans and you go, he's there by himself, he did it on his own. And you don't see the producers and writers and musicians and managers and makeup artists, the thousands of people that it takes to make that person look like they're just talking from their heart to yours. And so there are no success stories of a person with a one-man company or one-woman company that make it happen. So learning how to harness that tool is the new accelerant, because you can find those people in every market all over the world. So great question.
But also, you don't have to employ them. You can consult with them. So, we like to say that entrepreneurs prefer to rent as opposed to own resources because they got a lot more leverage that way. And it sounds like what you're saying is that in this era, the available resources to rent, to pick and choose from, mean that, my observation is that the structure of startups is so much lighter than it was even, in the late 90s, early aughts, when people were embracing the digital domain and things were kind of heating up. And you're nodding, so I guess you might.
I remember, launching one of the biggest e-commerce platforms back at that era. And you had to have a whole room of servers and gear and stuff.
Right.
And you just had to take the word for it of whoever you hired to run that. Yes, we need more, spend more money. I mean, so now that you can just plug into that. And one of the 12 truths is I talk about $1 trillion opportunity that's going to happen very shortly by disclosure. Google's a client, Microsoft is a client, et cetera. And I'm obsessed with how AR and glasses are we're not going to look at our phones for 5 hours a day. Yet if you go back 10 years ago when the smartphone came out, the big guys didn't make the apps. They did all the heavy lifting for you. Matter of fact, the first year, here's 2 of the top 10 best-selling apps on the iPhone. The Fart app, and there was a game with cats, which is my way of saying, if these guys are spending trillions of dollars to give us all heads-up display, what's one problem that you can solve there? It could be the next billion-dollar business. Mm-hmm. And it's all laid out for you.
So we've just got another minute or two. The other question I wanted to ask you, harken back to the discussion about fear. I actually wrote a piece in Forbes that you might be interested in, which kind of talked about the social psychology of how you can create a different context for fear. I mean, fear is really the interpretation that you put on top of the fight or flight syndrome. And so your heart races and your mouth gets dry and you get sweaty and you're prepared to take action. But social psychologists have shown through experiments that you can recontextualize those physical sensations into excitement. And so if you create the right kind of social environment, you create the right kind of messaging, people can make a transition from fear to activation in a heartbeat. And I don't know if that tracks with your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Every athlete does that to harness the adrenaline to do superhuman feats. It's that fear of losing that makes those hormones go through your body. So absolutely. But you can also keep omnipresent of the greater fears. And it makes those smaller ones just seem inconsequential. Before we run out of time, I did want to say that I have free workbooks for either of my books. Again, there's nothing that I sell. You can't buy a t-shirt with my face on it. But if you go to my website, jsamit.com, jaysamit.com, you can download these workbooks because a lot of times people are reading a book, go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you go to the next chapter and what you read in the last chapter goes out your ear. So I want people to be able to build that plan for themselves. Not to talk politics, but when I saw what happened in our nation's capital in January, what I saw were thousands of people feeling left out, left behind, fighting over leftovers. Because the bottom 140 million people right now in the US own less than 1%. It's a dog-eat-dog existence. And yet, there's access to everybody globally to this abundance. And if we could just teach people how to do it, we'd have a stronger global middle class. And fun fact for the day, there's never been a war between 2 countries that have a McDonald's, meaning if we can get a healthy middle class, we all benefit. So that's why I do this.
Not yet. Stay tuned. I mean, now that McDonald's is pretty pervasive internationally, that may be a historically true fact. But I hope you continue to be right on that one.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we need to make a transition at this point. Maybe I'll throw it back over to Brian for a little wrap up. But Jay, it's great to meet you, and I'm glad that someone is waving the banner of entrepreneurship reinvented for this current era, because nothing could be more important, I think.
Yeah, Jay, and your words of wisdom and your experiences. I mean, your experiences speak for themselves. The people that you've worked with it's an incredible list of who's who. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to help us and help inspire us to think differently about the future. So thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
And on that note, John, I just took so many notes. I feel like I can even think differently about how I approach my work as an entrepreneur, I guess, if you had to call it something.
Even you, Brian.
Yeah, even me. Always learning and unlearning with this show, as we say. So, John, over to you to introduce our next guest.
Well, I'm really excited to introduce Micheal Slaby. He is, I think, a living embodiment of the Intersections ethos, because he is a leader and domain expert in media, traditional and contemporary, also strategy, technology, and how they relate not only to business but to politics. And seems to have, from what I could glean from doing some background research, a really keen desire to make the world better, to improve the condition of the world by deeply understanding and bringing a critical sensibility to, let's call it media, for want of a better word, but all of the problems as well as the opportunities that it offers. His work in the public sector speaks for itself. He was the Chief Integration and Innovation Officer in 2012 for the Obama campaign, and previous to that, the Deputy Digital Director and CTO for the same cause. And he's the author of a really intriguing book that, when I read about it earlier this week, it's on order from Amazon, so I haven't had the benefit of really being able to delve into it, but it really seems to hook onto an optimistic tone that we don't often hear these days, because bad news obviously sells better than good news. So with that as an intro, Michael, it's great to have you here. Great to meet you.
John and Brian, both of you, thanks for having me. Thanks for the chance to join the conversation.
So it would be probably interesting to start with understanding what you're doing today. What's the Michael Slaby pie chart? And you are the chief strategist at Harmony Labs, which might be part of that story. But, what's most interesting to you now? Let's get a sense of your landscape, and then we can dig deeper.
Yeah, I think the most interesting pressing question that I sort of wrestle with every day is something that I think has become a very mainstream conversation around our ability to live in community with each other, and the relationship that media and storytelling and the technologies we rely on for community play in how healthy our sort of civic life is, how healthy our communities feel, how dysfunctional a lot of our community and political and civic life feel. You mentioned Harmony Labs is a nonprofit that's been around for about a decade that I'm now part of, where we study the effects of media on society, and that we define that very broadly: all kinds of media, all kinds of information, scripted, television, music, news, and how narrative and how the media we consume change the way society functions. And I think, as Jay was just talking about, and you just mentioned, we have been confronted by some really stark and often kind of dark effects of how media has been pressing on society. Just the joke of the more negative news tends to sell better than the more positive news, makes it hard to be an optimist. But I ultimately am very optimistic about what is possible about reimagining how media supports society. And that's sort of where I'm hoping that my book is a contribution to a conversation that has been going on now for more than a decade, but that has really become sort of a loud and sort of mainstream dominant conversation, including things as common as yesterday's conversation about the Facebook Oversight Board upholding President Trump's ban from Facebook, at least for now.
For 6 months, ticking clock.
Yeah,
Kind of
there's a little bit of there's a little hot potato going on with the responsibility around that choice.
It's the dead deer got moved over to Mark Zuckerberg's office, I think.
It'll be interesting to see if they pass it back to the Oversight Board again 6 months from now.
Well, that would buy them another 6 months or whatever. So I'm interested in diving a little bit deeper because, I think generally speaking, we might say that our country has been divided in a way that has very little Well, it has precedent, but is divided in an extreme way, and that media is part of that because it's allowed these kind of hermetically sealed off narrative universes to coexist. And if you buy into anthropology, which was one of my early academic loves, and you think about the power of narrative to affirm a point of view which is not based in reality, but which provides comfort and explanation. There's this whole tradition of revitalization movements, which are stories about how things are wished to be, but are not in fact, that are so sustaining that it leads to behavior that from the outside one would think of as being delusional and highly dysfunctional. And now media amplifies the power of story and makes everyone a storyteller in a sense and aggregates stories. So how are we going to get out of this? I mean, you said you're optimistic, but at the same time, you know a lot about what's going on in the media landscape. So how do we get out of this predicament?
Look, I think the setup you paint around sort of the role of storytelling in defining culture, defining community is really important. And it's a little bit the sort of Harari narrative from Sapiens that humanity's superpower is our capacity for fiction. And how we sort of organize that scale is by buying into these stories about the world. The nation state is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's a fiction that we invented to organize ourselves in large numbers. But when, as you mentioned, we are sort of separated into these hermetically sealed silos, I like that phrase. When the systems we use for the discovery of information are driven by outrage and confirmation bias, we end up in these very narrow worlds where we have no view of the overall denominator of culture. The differences and the things that the other opinions that sort of may challenge or improve our thinking or in fact outrage us sort of blend out of view, and they start to feel like they're irrational or impossible rather than something that we have to contend with and wrestle with and think about. And what is certainly true is that our media systems are deeply allergic to nuance. And it turns out that managing a multi-100 million person country full of diverse voices in a system where the power of storytelling is dramatically expanded, it requires a tolerance for nuance that most of the systems we rely on don't allow. And I think one of the things that we see as we sort of embrace the real consequences of sort of the sort of confirmation bias sorting you're talking about is that we've allowed these algorithms to kind of run amok for a decade. And we are at what feels like a cultural breaking point where we see, Jay was just talking about this sort of dramatic pent up sense of unfairness and unevenness in the economy. And I think that's sort of an inevitable consequence of sort of American style capitalism. And we are seeing the conflation of celebrity and popularity with credibility and authority, and the breakdown of sort of forms of power result in someone like President Trump ending up being president of the United States as a consequence of unhealthy systems of leadership and the response to unhealthy incentives in our public sphere. And I think why that's we feel the consequences of that. The reason I'm optimistic is that the public discussion about what we want the principles to be that drive our participation in a public sphere is something we can reclaim the responsibility for anytime. And this is probably the most important detail about the back and forth that we were joking about the Facebook oversight board, which is the board pretty explicitly demanded that Facebook examine the policies and algorithms that are leading to the behavior. And that expecting Facebook to do that on their own is very unlikely. The idea that they're going to be comfortable or capable of taking on that responsibility in a way that serves society is very unlikely. But it creates an opportunity for us to step into this vacuum of leadership and say, let's have the public, broad, inclusive, diverse discussion about what we want greater connectivity to do for society and create some guardrails for the next generation of innovation about our public sphere that is driven not purely by commercial incentives, but by incentives that are optimized around the health and value of community and discourse. And if we can articulate those with some conviction and clarity, I think the next decade doesn't have to look like the inevitable downward slide over the waterfall that the last decade might suggest we're headed toward.
Well, I get what you're saying, and at the same time, I guess something like 47% of the voting public went for Trump, and the majority of them still believe that the election was illegitimate, right?
Yes.
And this is kind of like delusional thinking on a scale with what anthropologists have described as, like for instance, the Melanesians after World War II built effigies of DC-3s and paraded up and down in military uniforms made of coconut shells and palm fronds, because they believed that the big airplanes would, the godlike airplanes would come back with spam to refill their coffers, even though they'd all gone back to their home countries. And that was an idée fixe that was very hard to dislodge, because it was woven into the social psychology of that civilization, so to speak. So I'm still not getting how we're going to get out of this, because it seems like nuance plays when you have people who can appreciate nuance, right? And or they've had critical thinking in high school or whatnot. But that doesn't necessarily relate to a lot of people out there who have to be kind of re-embraced into this overall sense of community that I agree is critically important. I mean, without it,
I think it's a reasonable question. And I think like Liz Cheney's op-ed yesterday in the Washington Post is an interesting guide for the sort of the decision point the Republican Party is in right now around their relationship to fact and truth versus their relationship to holding on to power. I think one of the challenges that the Republican Party faces is that they are in a moment where they are losing control as the minority party, and you see a party that is deeply attached to and effective at leveraging the least democratic features of our republic as a result. And is there an opportunity to sort of break the fever around this sort of attachment to the big lie, as it has been described, around what happened in November and the perceived illegitimacy of the election? And I think the answer is yes. What I would say is that I think your point about sort of the willingness to embrace sort of critical thinking and be critical is something that I see entirely possible at an individual level, but very, very difficult at a like national aggregate level. That the pressure of media and 24-hour sort of news cycles and like a sort of this, what I refer to often as the tyranny of outrage, sort of built into the reflexive cycle of political Twitter and news and all these other pieces, and even the sort of anti-democratic features of our primary process and campaign finance reform. This is not just a feature of media. It is a feature of a lot of unhealthy institutions, all sort of mutually reinforcing ineffective leadership that is really responding to the least common denominator in culture. And I think there was a comment in the chat a second ago about sort of President Trump sort of thriving on that lowest common denominator bias. I think what is important about sort of reclaiming this conversation is not looking at 47% of the country and saying, these people are all crazy or stupid. I don't think that's at all productive. I don't think it's useful. I think there is a lot of frustration and fear and uncertainty about the future in a lot of Americans, a lot of which are in that 47%, but not all. And I think one of the things that I think we need to recognize that the election we just went through, the fact that we have millions of new Americans, new voters voting for the first time for President Trump after 4 years of his administration represents a failure of clear storytelling on the side of Democrats about the nature of the country and the nature of the future. It doesn't include a lot of these, or doesn't feel like it includes a lot of these folks. And that is not a call to, quote unquote, make room for white supremacy. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a recognition that the unevenness and unfairness of modern American life is felt very differently across the country. And there is legitimate discomfort and pain with a sense of futurelessness that we have to address to give someone somewhere to go. The point you made about the power of narrative is that it gives us a sense, one of the things it gives us is a sense of safety. It gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. And I think one of the things we see right now over the course of the last year, during a time when, at maybe no time more than in recent memory, we were literally being told by authorities that other people were dangerous for our health. And that creates an anxiety about that makes the othering narratives of conspiracy theory even more appealing.
Sure.
Right? Resonate even more strongly, which demands of us, demands of our leaders, a more explicit attention to sense of belonging and safety and a sense of the future. And this is the kind of narrative problem that I think this is a sort of political and narrative problem inside on the left and inside the Democratic Party that needs to be addressed. I think how this relates to the systemic problem is it is not likely that the Facebooks and Twitters of the world are going to break their own addiction to outrage and confirmation bias. That is likely going to need to come through a public declaration of principles, regulation, public demand. I don't think you're going to see these companies dramatically shifting their behaviors or, for instance, helping us bridge these silos in their interfaces without very significant public demand. And they could do that very easily, right? Facebook knows what I don't see. I don't know what Facebook doesn't show me. That lack of agency, that lack of choice is one of the problems, one of the like core bugs in the current feature of how we experience culture is that I can't
Orwellian. It's Orwellian.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, so you said something really or you have a title of one of your blog posts which really intrigued me, which is what is a generative American ethos? And I think the underpinning of an ethos, a point of view about what is virtue, in a sense, going back to very classical themes, has been very absent in public discourse, except for bringing out tired old tropes of, we're nice people and we like to help others, and we're filled with opportunity and it's the great frontier. What's the best approach, or how can we actually generate a generative American ethos? I mean, what does that look like? Does it, to what extent does it draw upon past glory? Is there, some kind of Thomas Paine type of, manifesto that somebody's going to cook up and everyone's going to, their hair is going to light on fire because it's so great? I mean, how do you see that happening? I
think it's the right question. And I think ultimately the problem of our inability for discourse is that I'm not sure our public systems are well tuned to the conversation you are suggesting we need to have. And to some degree, improving the quality of our capacity to debate and discuss and challenge current thinking, the current ethos of our current systems might be a precursor to the conversation that you're describing. Because I think to a large degree, what is needed to reimagine a more generative America is in fact a conversation that is about the meaning of life and the purpose of community and society. Yeah. That we have allowed through sort of the industrial era, what I often refer to as the industrialization of meaning, that purpose and meaning, that efficiency and growth have become moral goods. And that what American capitalism demands of us is that we accept our role as an input of labor. And even a narrative like the dignity of work is really geared toward us accepting our role as an economic input, right? Rather than imagining the purpose of life being something about human flourishing, about human progress, about spiritual growth, about any number of other things that may or may not be measured in dollars or growth or wealth. Yeah. And I think that those are really our strongest measurements and sort of incentives for growth and progress suggests an emptiness to American society that a lot of people feel and a lot of people grade against. And I think a generative society is going to be one where we break that particular connection, where we disconnect work from survival in a way that allows us to reimagine what we mean by progress.
Well, and we've had some of that historically, the city on the hill and, the endless frontier and so forth and so on. So it sounds like, we may be drawing some from the storehouse of ideas of the past, but applying them to the needs of today and most importantly to the future. So, mindful of the time, I want to throw over to Brian because I know, based on my reading of his expression, which I've now had a lot of experience doing over the months, that he has got a lot of questions. So thanks, Michael, and let's turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Sean.
Hey, well, Michael, what a privilege it is to have you with us today. In fact, I already
It's
went
nice to
back.
be reconnected after about a decade since my
Yes.
days at Edelman, which I think is the last time we connected.
Well, I think we also did some things, if I'm not mistaken, when you were working with Obama, because I had been studying the art of, well, I called it persuasion, but now I'm just going to just use the word that it is, which is manipulation. I think we tend to talk soft, not you, but in general, about the problems that we're facing. And I don't think we're going to solve anything without actually now fighting fire with fire, because the problem is that we've gotten to the point where both sides, all sides, say do your research, and what's on the other side of that research is exactly where the problems lie. And with that being said, let's just look at the big lie, for example. It is how we sort of commonly refer to this myth that there was a rigged election, and then Donald Trump publishes a statement the other day saying the big lie is the Democrats rigging the election. And so he co-opted, in a brilliant way, co-opted this to work in his favor. And so now what you're seeing, and so let me set this up, Michael, because this is my frustration coming in the form of a question. Again, not at you, just the state of the world, which is...
I feel the frustration.
Yeah. So, like, you look at the GOP now has become probably the most powerful media organization in the world, in that it operates in a very orchestrated manner, and that its tentacles, like Spectre in a James Bond movie, its tentacles each have its own distribution outlets, whether it's an individual's social media account, whether it's a talking head on Fox News or Newsmax or OAN. They are essentially manipulating information and the receipt of that information amongst its constituents, where they're directly straight up lying to them. And then when they're called out on it, they say, well, I'm playing a character on television, as Tucker Carlson famously defended himself last year. But if you look at the 7 or 8, I can't remember the number of instances that the Supreme Court will exempt freedom of speech, one of them is essentially what they're doing. And it hasn't been challenged at that level, whereas you're intentionally misleading America, then that in of itself should be punished, because that's what they're doing. And Facebook, I helped launch a lot of their influence back in the day, and I wish I had more power to help here. But if you look at Kevin Roose, who has been manually powering the Facebook top 10 stories every single day, going back to the days of Donald Trump in the White House, and still to this day, 9 or 10 out of 10 every single day are misinformation or disinformation. And that, algorithms aside, that is essentially what the most popular stories that are shared on Facebook every single day are. So with all that said, Michael, when you have a party that is incentivized by money, power, and influence, and even though they've lost the majority, they still control the narrative. How do we as a nation, as a united nation, deal with this in a way that is equal or greater than the threat?
I think it is the defining question of this to a large degree. I think one of the things that your question speaks to is the lack of distinguishability of the type and intent of content that we consume on a daily basis, the lack of individual agency we have over what it is that we are told, distinguishing from whom those things came, what the intent of that content was, in a way that is something that we can leverage to be better, to make better sense of the world around us than our current systems allow. Right? The indistinguishability of the infinite stream of content is a feature of a business model that is bad for us as humans. It is bad for our ability to understand the world. It's not good for our psychology. It leaves us in a constant state of feeling like we are not enough, that we are not good enough to understand the world, and that we are at sort of in this sort of constant state of information overload that forces us into our least productive decision making, right? Like we are on our heels, we are looking for confirmation bias, we are looking for any port in the storm, and the ports we're going to grab are things like confirmation bias and proximity. And it makes us deeply susceptible to manipulation. We may be living through an era, not that manipulation or propaganda are new, they are not, but where those things are more effective than they have ever been because of the nature of the way we consume information. In a world where we can distinguish intent, where we can distinguish credibility and authority on topics and things, where the concept of news or I'm a character is built into the mechanism by which we consume information so it is more clear, we will have better agency as individuals to make better choices. I think the idea that only one of our parties is driven by sort of power and attention is not quite accurate. Like I think both parties, right? I think our politics is not healthy on either side of the aisle in a lot of dimensions. I think one of the big differences, like if you look at MSNBC and Fox News, both as very biased sources of information, one is biased about a worldview but still adheres to fact, while one is biased to a worldview independent of fact. And I think that's a subtle but significant distinction in watching misinformation becoming a tool of the reinforcement of power at all costs, right? That power is the end to which that sort of interest is aggregated. And so in a world where we can start to distinguish, we can start to make better choices. We can start to say, this is not what I want, in a way that right now we are not empowered to do. And the platforms that we rely on aren't really incentivized to help make better. Right. And so I think my experience of your frustration is that it is widely shared on both sides of the aisle by all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. I think the question you made about dominant narrative is partially a feature of the parties. There is more ideological and cultural homogeneity on the right than there is on the left. It means there are more narratives on the left about liberal, what it means to be liberal, what it means to be progressive, than there are narratives on the right, because there is a connection to a past that is largely white, largely, this sort of white middle class sort of structure, this nostalgic view of the past that creates a narrower narrative. So when we talk about, when you just start doing equal time, the conservative narrative is the one that is going to be the one that drives, unless we can come up with a broader way of thinking about what it means to be inclusive and what it means to remain sort of in a fact-based conversation about the nation, about the country, and being able to set aside things that are not rooted in fact, that are not credible, that are not authoritative is really important. I need help distinguishing between a tweet from you, a Facebook post from my mom about her cat, and Alex Jones telling me something crazy about vaccines. Like, I need help distinguish, because when they show up in my feed, they really look the same. And we need a way of distinguishing. And I don't want Mark Zuckerberg being the sole arbiter of what is valid. That's something that he needs help with. That is a public responsibility that needs to include a lot of voices and a lot of process, so that I can say, but if we had markers for some of these things and credibility could accrue to me over time as a source of information, over time, it might be possible for interfaces to start designing around optimizing for credibility. If I am routinely sharing misinformation and disinformation, maybe I don't get a retweet button. I can say whatever crazy bullshit I want, but it doesn't travel the same way. Maybe that would be helpful, right? And maybe if we had some mechanisms for measurability around the things we want and didn't just hope implicitly that the internet was going to magically provide public good for us, even though it's driven primarily by commercial incentives, we might be able to start proactively optimizing for a positive outlook of the world. And I think that's why I continue to remain up, because that path is available to us. It is hard. It is complicated. In a world of wildly partisan process, like relying on public systems and public regulation to improve this process, I don't think is naive, but is very hard. And the reason I don't think it's naive is because a year ago, Mark Zuckerberg went to Congress and he had to tell them how he made money. He had to tell them that he was dumbfounded, but he had to say, well, I sell ads. Like, that's how we make money. And it was like, how do you not understand this? And this week, or last week, the Senate Subcommittee on Law, Privacy, and Intelligence had a very detailed, thoughtful hearing on algorithmic transparency. That's progress. It's not big and flashy, but that's progress. And so I think we can keep moving in that direction, and I think we can get better results from our leaders.
Yes. Well said, Michael. I've a million more questions, so we're gonna have to bring you back, and we're out of time.
I'd be happy to come. I'd love to come back.
We'll read the book in advance, so we'll do a little homework.
For all the people, please do read it, and please do your part. The only thing I would add, Michael, is we also have to find some accountability here, because we are watching this just erode. And I'll just give you a quick aside. Tucker Carlson the other day, you went on a rant about how wearing masks is child abuse, and you can watch the dots connect from his show. And my sister sent some flyers and pictures of a protest. She lives in Santa Monica, where they were all flying banners and flags about masks are a form of child abuse. And you see that it's no longer playing a character on television. It actually has direct societal influence, and that's what we have to respond accordingly. So, Michael,
let me just insert one comment, because I think this is classic Russian disinformation tactics that we are now experiencing in the United States, and that is probably the subject of a whole other show.
Yes, and this comment here. I think we just lost Michael.
I think when Russia came up, he just had to kind of leave.
Yeah, no, we can't. Or maybe Russia took him out. Oh, there he's back.
Russians, and all of a sudden I was gone. Like,
yes,
they are in StreamYard. I don't know.
Yeah, they are StreamYard.
Oh, that's crazy. Oh, Michael, thank you so much. You left your final piece there was very inspiring. So thank you, and gives us hope.
Thanks for the conversation and the chance to extend it. I appreciate the time, and I'd love to come back.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to be doing some fun things on Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces as well. So we will continue this conversation. Thank you, Michael.
I hope so. Sounds great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, John.
Take care.
Well,
wow.
I'm excited. Oh, hey, Michael's back. I'm excited. I'm hopeful. Please do read his book, For All the People. Just in case you need to see it one more time, there it is. John, I'll let you take us out this week.
All right, we'll have a little music.
All right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific.